So in this video, we're going to start talking about how to create a basic contact form in HTML. Now, this is going to be a really basic contact form, and just so you know, in Dreamweaver there is a Forms tab where you can add spry validation items, and these are really good because they let the data be validated and make sure it's correct before people send it through. But that's not what this video is about. There's many videos and resources online teaching you how to do Dreamweaver contact forms. So if we're in here, we're going to just do a basic form. I've created a div that's called contact. Obviously, if this was on an actual website with sidebars and navigation, you'd probably have a content div. I just wanted to do a contact div so that we could see it separated from the rest of the website. And you always want to give them a little bit of information before you start your form. The first and most crucial step when you do a form is to actually add the form field. So click the form field and you're going to see a red box, and this is telling you that everything in your form should go in here. If at the end you see a bunch of red boxes everywhere, then you've done it wrong. So everything in here should be your form. So let's give this form an ID of contact form and make sure it's not the same name as your div, which I called my div contact, so I have to call my form contact form. And now we need to start building our form. Now with this, you can go about this many ways, but I like to use a table. So I'll go to common and choose a table, and I'll do, let's say I want 7 rows and 2 columns, and I want it to be 100% of its parent, which will be the contact div, and I'll say 0 borders and 5 padding and 0 spacing. And we don't need any headers for this, so we'll click OK. Alright, and the reason why I did this is because I want to have all of my questions right aligned over here and all of my input fields left aligned over here, so we kind of have this straight alignment down the center. But to do this, you should always start in the second column, and then you're going to go to the Forms toolbar, and this is where you're going to see the various types of form input fields. Text field is just a one-line field, and this is something like where you can ask them their name, their email, anything that is just one line. And we're going to skip the hidden field, and then we have a text area, and this is when it's multiple lines, so this might be like a comment area. And then we have a checkbox where we can say, do you want to sign up for the newsletter? And they can check yes. Or we can say, how did you hear about us? And we can have them choose newspaper, radio, friend, internet, and they can check many. So when it comes to check marks, they can check one or a lot or whatever they need to check. And then we have a checkbox group, which is, like I said before, it's just a larger group of checks that you can do right here. Then you have a bullet where they can either choose it or not choose it, and then a radio group. Now with the radio group, it's different than a check mark in that when you use radio buttons, you can only choose one. So this is something like male or female. They can only choose male or female. Or saying, what is your household income bracket? It's going to be one answer. So this is where you can use a radio group. And then you have list, menu, and jump menus. And then you can also add fields where you allow them to add an image, you allow them to upload a file, and then we of course have our buttons. So we're not going to cover all of these just because we don't have time and we're trying to keep this form as simple as possible. We'll do the basics. So let's go ahead and choose a text field. And you want to give every field its own unique ID. So I'm going to call this one name. And the label is what they actually see here, like the question. So some things don't need a label. So I'll do name, colon, and remember with ID you don't have capitals or spaces, but the label you can. And I'm going to say attach label using for. So we're saying this name is for whatever the input area is here. And I'm going to have it be for. And then I can come in here, and you always want to have some way that you can contact them back. So whether it's email or phone number or whatever, it's up to you. So I'll just keep going through these, and maybe I want to do newsletter. And I'll go ahead and you can either have a label for this or have no label. So I'll just say no label because I want to type my own label. And this is where I can type in after this, would you, you like to, okay. And well, maybe that's not a good question because you're saying would and you might say yes or no. You might instead say sign me up for monthly newsletter, and then they know if they check it, that's what they're trying to say. But I'll leave that up to you. So then Radiobutton Group, I'll let you explore that a little bit more. But when you do things like a button group, or let's just do a list. So let's say we wanted to say, let's say state. And obviously we would have more address information besides just state. But when you do these things, if you click on the actual input field for any of these, this is when you can change it. So here's where I can choose a menu or I can choose a list. And then I'm going to say what my list values are. So obviously I can choose Colorado and Colorado, Arizona, Arizona. So maybe it's just the states around us. And you can always give an option that says like other, which means if they're coming to your site from maybe a foreign country or whatever, you never want to give them where they're kind of stuck picking something when it's not going to work for them. So always give them kind of a generic option. So I'll click OK. And then we can say initially selected. That means Colorado will always be the top, which doesn't make any kind of sense. So you might want to say like, please select, and then ... and then that gives them directions on what they need to do for here. So then we can do our text area. So this will be comments. And this one I do want to label. And last, we will add a button. So this button we'll call submit, and you don't need a label for any of your buttons. That's why it's automatically no label. And we'll do a courtesy of adding a button called reset. Oops. And for each one of these, this one I can say reset form. And that means if they're typing it all in and they want to change it, they can, or they want to delete it and retype it, they can do that if you want them to do that. So here I can, for each one of these input values, I can decide how long it's going to be, what the maximum characters. So for instance, if it was a zip code, then I want to just make sure they only type in 5. So when it comes over here to actually line these up, you can't just highlight the label and move it over here because it's just going to highlight the text. What you need to do is click inside that label and then click on this label tag, and that'll make sure you're moving the correct thing over to the side. So I'll click in there, click label, move it to the side. This is not a label, this one is. And then this one. And then what I can do here is for this column, I can do right, and I can make sure it's sitting at the top. So that looks much better than it would before. So for each one of these, if you look in the code, you can see, you can kind of, now that you've worked through code, you can kind of see that we have an input tag, and then you have the label tag. So if I wanted all my labels to look like my paragraph, I could come in here and do label, and then this is a regular paragraph. And if you wanted to, you should be able to do input. And so the only problem with input is this gets really small, so that's probably not a good thing. I might style input differently outside of the paragraph and the label. But there our contact form is working really well. And now we just need to figure out how to actually make this contact form submit. If I go to live view, this is what it looks like. So people can type in their information, and it looks like it is working well, except for you can see emails are probably longer. So this is where I might want to come back in and choose this and say the character width, maybe I want it to be 50. And that's super long, so I'll make this one the same, character width 50. Oops. Character width. And you can obviously make this one bigger if you wanted to, and you can say how many lines it needs to be, etc. So now it's just a matter of trying to get this form to process, and we're going to do that using something called a chaos mailer.